You have your basic setup when you open up QuickBooks for the first time, you start to build it out, and then you bring somebody in, you bring in an accountant to help with that side of it, and the accountant goes and sets up a chart of accounts, but they're going to set up something that's more in line with tax accounting. Talk to the audience here and tell them a little bit of the difference in the chart of accounts between a managerial approach to it and being able to run the business off of it versus what you might be getting from your accountant, why it's okay to have both of them. Where are some areas when you look at small businesses in the trades and you look at the chart of accounts that they've got set up, where do you see some misconceptions and where they have those different line items placed versus where they should be?
I know this sounds simplistic, but it's making sure that we have things that are associated with the actual production of the work itself, be in the COGS section, the cost of goods sold section, and the things that are affiliated with keeping the business running in the expense section.
So now I'm looking at the P&L. Am I looking at numbers or am I looking at percentages?
It depends. What do you want to ask?
I want to know how well I'm doing. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Violand's GPS podcast, Growing Professional Skills. I am your host, Jeff Jones, here with Violand Management, and joining me is another member of the Violand Management team, our esteemed business advisor, Mr. Josh Bachman. Josh, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So,
my mess.
And your mess. I wasn't going to bring it up this early, but as you can see, Josh lives in a closet with all of his toys from when he was very young, and he won't give them up.
That's true.
So he wanted to bring them onto the podcast today as a safety blanket. So we're excited about that.
A dog for you, Jeff. So yeah, my dog is gone. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, buddy. So, but what we really want to get into, and something we haven't done on this podcast before, and we're business coaches. And so that means you hire firms like us because you want to run a better business, you want to make more money, is we haven't spent a lot of time talking about the financial reports and how you use those financial reports to make better decisions as you build your business and you grow the team and hopefully you put some additional dollars in your paycheck. And that's really where Josh comes into play because, Josh, your background, and I'll let you speak for you, but you're an operations guy, but really at heart, you're a numbers and analytics guy. Do you want to kind of let everybody know what that means and how you bring that to the clients?
Yeah, Jeff, I think really for me, what it means is that I approach the business through numbers. And I think that's how I kind of learn what's going on inside the business. And then it allows me to start asking some of the, what's the right word, the right next questions. And I believe that, just from my background and the way that my brain works, that's kind of how I approach all problems in my life. Drives my wife crazy, but I approach those problems through numbers. So I think that rolls right over to business as well. And that's kind of my background. My training is in mathematics. And then I use this to apply it to the business strategies. And that allows me to step in and hopefully ask some good questions to get us to the next level, what's going on inside your business.
So how many Goodwill Hunting quotes do you think I could fit into the podcast today?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one. Let's go there. Yeah, I'll have to get out some textbooks or something and try to remind myself how to do calculus, but make it happen. Yeah.
Well, most business owners, especially those of us in the trades, you get into it because you like getting your hands dirty, you like helping people, you like the work, maybe you like the sales side of it, but a lot of them don't understand the numbers. They've got some basic financial understanding, managing checkbooks and things like that, but when you run the business, especially with how challenging the market is today, you can't just be an electrician who has a business to make money. You have to be a business owner who happens to do electrical work or happens to do plumbing or happens to do restoration. And that comes with understanding the numbers. So what we really want to dive into today is how to interpret financials when you're not somebody who has an accounting background. You're somebody that wants to go get their hands dirty, but you need to understand this information, again, to make better decisions. And oftentimes the numbers that you're looking at on those financial reports might be deceiving if you don't know the right questions to ask and you don't know the next question to ask. So if you're good with that, let's jump in right there and see if we can help some people understand their financials a little bit better.
Absolutely. So,
first, just digging into the problem. What do you feel is the biggest misconception you see about profit and loss statements?
I think the biggest misconception at the beginning, Jeff, is just that people don't know what that statement means, right? I often start my conversations with a business owner that I'm getting to meet, and ask them what it is that they're watching, from a numbers perspective. And sometimes the honest answer, when I can get somebody that's really going to be open and upfront and honest with me, is they just tell me they're watching their bank account, right? And they go, hey, that's cool. There's money in the bank today. That means I can go to lunch. Sweet.
End it. That's
That,
right.
that's a great day. Or I can make payroll, or I can pay a subcontractor, or I can buy a truck. I take it from that lunch example, and you can see it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I think the misconception around the profit and loss statement is that, where do we focus on that statement? There's a lot of things going on there, and probably somebody else helped us set up this chart of accounts. How are we going to start to interpret that? Do we stop at the top line revenue and celebrate there? Yay, great, we had top line revenue. Do we stop at a COGS line and go, great, I'm managing efficient crews? Do we just dive in straight to the bottom line and go, awesome, I'm running a bottom line? And then I think Jeff, when I meet with a new business owner, especially somebody as you described that's really coming from being on the truck to now being behind the desk, I look at them. We struggle a lot with: do I look at a cash-based P&L? Do I look at an accrual-based P&L? What's the difference there? What does one tell us versus what the other tells us? And what's that story about the performance of my company? I think that just really confuses people as we get started, and love to see if we can help people clear that up a little bit.
Well, let's go into setting up that chart of accounts real quick. So something that I've seen here is oftentimes you have your basics set up when you open up QuickBooks for the first time and you start to build it out. And then you bring somebody in, you bring in an accountant to help with that side of it. And the accountant goes and sets up a chart of accounts, but they're going to set up something that's more in line with tax accounting.
For sure.
And they should. Their job is to make certain that you get to keep as much money as you can. How talk to the audience here and tell them a little bit of the difference in the chart of accounts between a managerial approach to it and being able to run the business off of it versus what you might be getting from your accountant, why it's okay to have both of them, and how you sort of set them up in different ways.
Yeah, Jeff, and I think you're actually, in asking that question, you're actually setting up the difference between a cash-based and an accrual-based P&L as well, right? Mm-hmm. Because I certainly don't want anybody paying taxes on something that's been accrued, but you don't have in your hand yet, right? So it's very important from our tax professional perspective that we do allow that, and allow that cash basis to tell us a good story about what's going on. I just looked at it when I start to have conversations around the performance of a company and how it's going to produce and what's coming down the pipe next. That's really when I have to not get, to your terms, Jeff, a little more managerial about how I look at the numbers and what's going on in that chart of account to tell me what the really good stories are. From a tax perspective, and if I'm thinking from the CPA level, they're just going to stop at, hey, listen, you've got $1 million in revenue. Cool. Awesome. From the way that I want to have the conversation, I'd rather talk to you about, great, you have $500,000 in recon work and you have $500,000 in plumbing and another $300,000 in mitigation. Are you happy there? Is that cool? Is that a sweet spot where you want to go? And I think if we don't start to ask that next question to figure out how that's distributed, we can just get stuck at, hey, you know what? My CPA just cares about the flat number. And like you said, as he should, but I just want to take it that next level and make sure that we're splitting it apart a little bit different to make the most sense for us to make good decisions about what's going on in our business.
So if you're speaking to a business owner and they're trying to figure all of this out, when do you want them to start recognizing revenue for you to be able to make decisions off of these numbers?
You really want to jump into a revenue recognition conversation
this early? Yeah, let's jump in. Let's show them what you can do, buddy.
Great. All right. So you're making fun of my toys, and then you're jumping right into revenue recognition. Awesome. Let's just jump into that. Yeah, I think that's a challenge for a new business owner, or no offense to anybody, but an immature business owner, somebody that's getting going with what they're doing. And I don't mean immature in their toys behind them. I just mean immature in that they don't have much experience with business. I think it's very easy for us, Jeff, to recognize revenue in all sorts of different ways. The easiest way to think about it, and this is backed up when we talk to a CPA, is that I get a check, it's got my name on it, I cashed it, that's revenue. Awesome, cool. And I don't have a problem with that from a tax perspective or from making sure that my bank account shows some money in it. But in my opinion, that's not really revenue from the perspective of how my company is performing. And so I want you to accrue revenue when you've earned it. And what I mean by earn is when you've done the work. And so that's the first question I would ask is, hey, work's done. We've completed it. We've invoiced it. Great. Now that becomes revenue. It doesn't say whether I've gotten that paid and gotten that taken care of yet. That's where receivables comes in, and that's a whole other conversation. We can talk about receivable strategies, but really, revenue recognition is when you've earned it. And all too often, I think that it's very challenging for us to flip our minds to, hey, I've earned this work, I recognize revenue, instead of, hey, I have cash in my hand, I recognize revenue. I think we have to be real careful about how we're calling that, and what we're saying represents actually revenue inside my company.
So let's stick with that chart of accounts thing real quick again. Where are some areas when you look at small businesses in the trades and you look at the chart of accounts that they've got set up for them before you start getting heavily involved? Where do you see some misconceptions and where they have those different line items placed versus where they should be?
Well, actually, Jeff, before I get directly to that, I'll stay up at the revenue section since we're talking about that. The income section of the P&L first is that sometimes I see one of two things: either everything's lumped together, which doesn't tell me a whole lot about your business. I've already spoke a little bit to that. But sometimes I also see that the opposite reaction can become true. We swing the pendulum, go all the way to the other side, and we split it apart 97 different ways. And so I would say, hey, my first thought about anything on the chart of accounts, but especially in income, is I'm only going to split it apart as much as it informs my decisions. Meaning I don't need to know how much I did on the east side of town in this zip code and have that be an income statement line. But there are times that I see that be tempting because, hey, the more data I have, the better. And so we just have to be careful around those things and make sure we're kind of putting that stuff together purposefully and intentionally. Now, when I get to down into the actual heart of the chart of accounts and where things are set, really, Jeff, I think it's making sure, and I know this sounds simplistic, but it's making sure that we have things that are associated with the actual production of the work itself, being the COGS section, the cost of goods sold section, and the things that are affiliated with keeping the business running in the expense section and the fixed expense section. I know that's simple. It sounds simple for me to say it. In application, it becomes much, much more difficult. Like, Jeff, my friend, you're a sales guy. Where do I put you? How does that work out? And let's just say that not only are you a sales guy, but you're a sales guy who gets paid on commission. Do I put your base salary one place and do I put your commission in another place? Because your commission only happens when you sell something, right? So okay, now we get to some gray area that it doesn't become so clear. And so, my friend, you are a great example of some of the confusion we see in P&Ls very quickly.
So do you think that let's take my situation then and say I make salary and I make a commission and I make a bonus and then I have my expenses that come with it. Hypothetically, that's how I get paid. What you're saying then is you want to go in and you want to look at those in different areas within that. Is there a set standard for that, or is that depends on what industry you're in or what those dollar figures look like?
Well, first off, Jeff, I'm just really happy you get paid.
Yeah, me too.
That goes good.
Thrilled that's still happening, actually.
Kids, yeah, that's good things. Second, Jeff, I would say that it's not. I don't tend to split that apart based on different industries. I really want to have some regular rhythm around how I recognize this stuff and how I allocate it, so that when I'm talking period over period or company versus company, that I'm having the same kind of discussion around that. And so I would say that, the stuff that your base salary, your car, your phone, the things that keep you doing what you're doing, that stuff I'm going to put in the expense section, because whether or not you sell one thing or not, I'm still paying that out. I'm going to pay your base salary. I'm still going to get you a car. That's still going to be how those things are going to work out for you. What I'll put in the cost of goods section is I'll put in your commissions up there. Hey, okay, great. You sold a job. Now that goes into cost of goods, and we'll see how that plays out. I think the hesitation or the confusion that comes to a lot of people is, as soon as I say that we're going to take your commission and roll that into cost of goods sold, they're asking me, do I have to now job cost that against that job? And my answer there is no. it doesn't have to be job costed, but I still would like it from an overall company's perspective in the cost of goods sold section. And so I like that run up. And I think that's a fairly good standard practice, so that then I can look at the performance of the company and kind of grade that against what's going on. What is it taking you to get a job produced? And I like to have the cost of acquisition for that job in that cost of goods sold.
So what about the money that I'm pulling out of the business to pay for my boat? Do I put that under the miscellaneous one, or is that a separate line item?
You said we had a CPA. Couldn't we go talk to him about that? So like I don't know that I don't want to have boats in the P&L.
Don't want to have boats in the P&L. Okay.
I try to avoid those kind of things, and I'll take a jab at my CPA friends. But in all seriousness, that's where you go talk to a CPA and you talk about some interesting strategies as to how you can have a boat on your balance sheet and not have it show up in the P&L, and let's make sure that's not happening.
That's where you ask for forgiveness and not permission.
You said it, not me. So yeah,
right. That's quality advice right there, buddy. Okay, so now I'm looking at the P&L. Am I looking at numbers or am I looking at percentages?
It depends. What do you want to ask?
I want to know how well I'm doing.
Yeah, I think I look at both. When I'm paying attention to things in a COGS perspective, so above the line, as we term it. So I'm looking at cost of goods sold. I'm going to pay attention up there to percentages, because really what I'm looking for is seeing, hey, for every dollar you produced, how much did it take you to produce that? So that to me is important in a percentage basis, because if we don't do that very quickly and we start comparing dollars against dollars, you could spend $100 today and $100 tomorrow, but you could produce totally two different things. So you could get trapped there if you compare dollars in the COGS section. When it comes down to fixed expenses, then I'm much more attracted to comparing dollars there. Hey, today to keep the lights on, it cost you $20. Tomorrow, it cost you $25. Tell me about the difference. Did somebody stay all night and leave the lights on? I mean, I'm stupid examples, but I think you get the gist of what I'm saying here. I'll compare.
So you're looking for outliers. If there's a significant change, then is there an outlier? Did a storm happen and work picked up? Did an employee do something stupid? Did we make one bad decision versus is this a repeatable offense?
Yeah, but I think you can do that with percentages and dollars. Like same kind of thing above in the COGS line, Jeff. I think if suddenly I see that, today it was 40% and tomorrow it's 45%. Okay, what caused that 5% delta? What caused that 5% change? Did my guys have a lot of overtime this week? Let's talk about why. Okay, was that justified overtime? Let's go pay attention to the labor perspective. So I'm paying attention to percentages there, but you notice what I just did right there without really saying it is I also looked at the percentage of revenue, right? So I looked at labor as a percentage of revenue. That kind of stuff becomes crazy important for me very quickly to do my comparisons as well.
So the numbers that show up in this report, and we're going to assume the numbers are fairly timely, they're fairly accurate that we're working off of here. We've got a decent bookkeeper, an accountant, a CPA, however we're working through this. So now I've got the numbers on this report. I'm pulling up my reports out of QuickBooks at a routine. I'm following through on this, and I'm staring at them. They're lagging indicators. They're the result of, but they also tell us how we're doing. They're the score at the end of the game.
Yep.
So that's really what we're bringing you in on the show for today, is to talk through what to do with it now. It's showing me what's already done. I can't change anything, or that's cooking the books. So how do I ask questions? How do the numbers potentially mislead me if I don't know the right questions to ask?
Okay. Well, Jeff, first off, I appreciate you not letting me cook the books, or not letting anybody else cook the books, because
I got my boat.
I'm happy. Another conversation, but I still think, Jeff, there is a tendency, especially with small business owners, that we don't, and this is not cooking the books, but we don't close the books either, right? We don't say, hey, you know what? It is October 10th and September is now closed. That's done and dusted. If we find something that's wrong, even if our lagging indicators, there's a temptation to say, you know what? I'll just go back to September and I'll fix it. That's well and good. And sometimes that can tell me a better story, but I want to be very intentional about when I would go back to a prior period and put something in there. And really, I hate to say that, that would almost be like an act of Congress, especially with today's Congress. But when I look at things like that, it really needs to be a big deal for me to go back into a prior period and write something over. So I appreciate you kind of setting that stage of the fact that, hey, this is lagging This is telling me what's going on there. I think what it comes down to, Jeff, to make good decisions around that is you mentioned it at the beginning and you said, let's just assume that this is timely. That's the first thing, right? It's got to be timely, right? I would hesitate to tell you how many folks I talk to who we haven't closed September yet. It's October 30th. And so how do we work through that? Or I'm still waiting on Q2 numbers. Well, it's the end of the year almost. Like, why are we talking about Q2? So that timely piece is really, really important, because if I get that far out, not only is it lagging, but it's lagging and I've forgotten about what happened last month. I don't mind it being lagging, because really what I'm looking for here is, if there are, going back to those outliers you were talking to, what I could do for the next period that's going to fix those kind of things. Going back to something like I said, hey, all right, first question, am I happy with the revenue? If I'm not happy with revenue, what could I do to fix revenue? And that's when I get back and I talk to Jeff, my sales guy, and I say, Jeff, go sell something. And we start
quality
having
leadership right there, Josh. Well
exactly,
done.
Exactly. I learned from the best.
Yes.
But if I'm happy with the revenue side, Jeff, and then I look at the COGS percentage and it's out of whack, even as a lagging indicator, then I've got to ask that next question. Okay, great. It's out of whack, indicator number one. Okay, why is it out of whack? And that's where I need to dive in a little bit further. Is it in labor? Is it in materials? What's happening here? And I'm looking for, like you said earlier, those outliers that are gonna key me in on places where I need to pay attention, and see what's actually going on. I think the easiest one to talk about in our service industries is probably labor, because a lot of what we do there is very labor intensive. And I think that's an easy place for us to look, even if it's lagging, and say, hey, this looks a little off from where it should be historically, or where it should be for me to make money. Okay, now I've got bad cost of goods sold. I've got labor out of whack. All right, now I got to ask that next question of, why is labor out of whack? Okay, let's go pay attention to how people are clocking in and clocking out. Oh my goodness. Do you realize that when I break down overtime hours, I've got, an average of 9 hours per week per person of overtime? Huh, that's interesting, because that 9 hours is time and a half in most states. Wow, that labor becomes very, very expensive very quickly. Is it justified time and a half? Is it justified overtime? And now I get to kind of explore those a little bit further and see what's going on. So I really think you're hearing the premise behind kind of my whole concept here. It's just, all too often we stop at the surface level and stop asking those next questions. And I think as we kind of mature ourselves as business owners, we have to continue to ask that next question and just kind of follow that trail for where it's going to lead us.
So let's go down that trail then. So we're going to say that there's 3 questions that every business owner should ask when they're reviewing their financials. Off what you just said, we're going to take a look at revenue. We're going to take a look at COGS. We're going to take a look at labor.
Okay, that's a start. Yeah.
Where do I go from there? Am I good on a review right there, or how do I take the next step in understanding it? Once I feel that I'm comfortable, the revenue's where I expected, COGS are within reason, I don't have the 9.5 hour labor, overcharged labor going on. I've got reasonable amounts. Where am I going from here?
Well, I think Jeff, I continue walking down through the P&L first, which is so I probably would break it down something like this. I'd start at revenue, then I look at COGS, then I look at fixed expenses, and that leads me, when I do that math for all that stuff, that leads me to net profit. If all that adds up, then I kind of check that piece off for a second and say, hey, the P&L, which is telling me about the performance of the company in this prior period that I'm looking at, seems to be healthy. And that I can kind of check that off, and I can kind of take a breath for a second. I think the challenge for us, Jeff, as business owners, is that we allow ourselves to take that breath right there. Even if the P&L is quote unquote healthy, we tend to stop right there, and we don't ask another question and really look at, oh my gosh, what happens when I look at the balance sheet? And as soon as I say balance sheet, then I tend to lose, like, I don't know, 3/4 of my viewers, 3/4 of my audience, because they're like, I've heard of something called balance sheet, but I don't know if I really want to talk about balance sheet. Because Jeff, I would think, well, not think, I can show you examples of healthy P&Ls with terrible balance sheets, and this means I have a company that's about to go under. because the balance sheet's going to represent a little bit more about my financial position today and what's going on. And so I could have somebody that's performing really, really well, but has no cash on hand and has a lot of debt, things that aren't showing up on the P&L, and show a company that's in a world of hurt, even though at a profit and loss standpoint, they're performing.
Would it be fair to say that the P&L is what most people look at when they're doing these reviews, but the balance sheet is really what keeps them up at night? Is that where they feel the pain?
I think if they really got to answering the questions, absolutely, Jeff. I think that's the truth. I think that all too often, though, go back to your high school or your basic economics classes that you were taking in college. All too often, we don't do a great job about giving us bank balance, breath, checking out the bank balance, making sure there's something in the bank today, and then the P&L level review, and then the balance sheet review. I think all too often we don't even make it as far as the balance sheet review. But at the balance sheet, that would be what would be keeping me awake at night, because that would show the picture of, oh my gosh, I'm in a weird spot here from the perspective of I got a crap ton of debt. I don't have any receivables, and my cash is looking low. Even though I looked at last month's P&L, or last period's P&L, or last quarter's P&L, and it shows things are trending in the right direction. Awesome. Am I converting that into real life sense? And I think for me, the balance sheet is where the rubber hits the road.
So we can't do financial reviews every once in a while. We can't do financial reviews when we just feel like something's in trouble, or we know we got to go meet with the banker anytime soon. There has to be a routine that comes with this. There has to be a process
for sure
that comes with this. So now you've got me on a P&L. Now you've just brought this balance sheet into my world.
Yeah.
So talk through, what does a repeatable financial review process really look like?
Yeah.
I wanted to systemize that in my business.
Yeah. I think it goes to my toys over here, Jeff. I play the drums because I like rhythm. And I think that's exactly kind of what you're talking about, is I need to develop a rhythm for how I review those kind of things. I know we talked about some of our financials being lagging indicators, but I'm still paying attention to them at the perspective of as I'm going through the month, right? I'm still paying attention to my running P&L as I'm going through right now in the month that I'm currently sitting in before I get there. So I think a weekly rhythm and looking at where I'm sitting, and now I'm not going to do the breakdown and the hardcore analysis in a period that's still ongoing, but I'm going to start to get my pulse. I'm going to start to take a check as to what's going on, and I'm probably going to do that at least on a weekly. I think I look at the more hardcore, the more hard lined review, and I look at that being something that I'm going to do at a minimum of monthly, and I want to do it at the same time every month, so that I'm comparing, as close as I can, apples to apples, a same period against the same period. Jeff, the rhythm that I usually like is I tried to say that I'm going to come up very consistently with the time I'm going to close that prior period. In my past, I've used things like this: the 10th day of the month, or the second Tuesday of the month following. I don't care what you want to put there. Just make it something that you can look at yourself in the mirror or your leadership within your company and say, this is where we're going to cut this off. And that means that on the 11th of the month, if I'm closing it on the 10th, I could sit down that day, have my review, and say, here's how I performed in that prior period, and see what goes on. And by review, yes, Jeff, 100%. I'm talking about income. I'm talking about P&L. I'm talking about balance sheet, all at that same time, where I'm kind of seeing what's going on, so I can make sure I've got the best sense and the best view of what's going on in my business, to make sure that I'm not going to be late or lagging on the decision.
So a lot of business owners, when it comes to understanding their financials, even if they're good at it and they understand it, they keep it very close to the vest. It's very personal, especially if the financials are not strong. They don't want their employees to know that, because they don't want the employees to sense any kind of weakness. So as the leader of the business, and I'm not talking owner operator, I'm talking you've got employees that are counting on you, that want to be part of the team, that want to see this thing be successful. So how can financial clarity improve team communication and accountability and give them a better understanding of what's going on? What's the team's role when it comes to the financials?
For right or for wrong, Jeff, I'm an open book kind of guy. That's just my premise. And maybe that comes from my past history, where the owners that I had a chance to do business with in my own personal career were open with their books and would show me kind of what's going on. Now,
Mhm.
does that mean they showed me their check of what they received from the company or their boats? I didn't see their boats, Jeff, so I didn't see what was going on from that perspective. But they were open for the things that were under my control and that I needed to have some interpretation with.
So Chuck Violand has never brought you on his boat before? He
Uh,
has brought me on his boat.
I've been on Chuck's boat,
Okay.
but I don't know how Chuck paid for his boat.
All right. Fair enough.
I'm not going to ask that question. You can ask. Go ahead.
Fair enough.
But Jeff, I would say that I think we need to find rhythms around how we can share financial data and not be afraid of that, good or bad, with the folks that we work with. And I think that can become a little bit of a personality or a little bit of a fingerprint to your company. I don't think there's one rule that says here's how you have to do it. I would just challenge you to be open with your numbers. Share how we're recognizing revenue. Share how we're getting to that point. Share what our COGS look like. What does it cost us to run a job? I think that level is really something that we should almost all share. What does it cost us to do our jobs? The stuff that's fixed expenses, that can be a little more tricky. Maybe I don't give you the breakdown of what that is, but I show you what that overall number is. So you can see how it's kind of going through and paying attention to. I also think that the most important thing we can do there is define for them what's going on and define for the people we work with as to what this actually means. Because if I just say, hey, great, you're sitting at 9% 9% net profit. Cool. Great. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate you telling me that. Am I happy? Are we having a party or are we upset? Like, tell me what that number means. And I think that's all too often what we do is we just throw a number out there and go, you should know. You should be happy. It's 9%. Sweet. Cool. There's a lot that goes into the interpretation of whether I'm happy or sad around that. And I think it's important that as we tend to open our books or as we would push towards opening our books, that we explain a little bit about what that means.
So it sounds like when I talk to salespeople, when I hire salespeople, what I'm looking for is curiosity. More so than anything, if you want to be successful in sales, you have to be curious because you have to ask questions and find pain points and solve problems. It almost sounds very similar here when I'm diving into these financials that it's not black and white. That's not the point of it. It's the curiosity piece of what do these numbers mean? What do they represent? What's the next question? What's the next story? So where do you see curiosity playing a role in leadership when it comes to the numbers?
Well, first off, Jeff, I'm curious that you were able to compare salespeople with financials.
We do like money, buddy. We like it a lot.
Be curious. So
Yes.
we'll just play that out there a little bit. But I think that's exactly it, Jeff. Is we have to create people that are not even people. We have to create an environment that allows questions to be asked about what's going on in the business. We talked about, you laid it out earlier and said, hey, here's these 3 questions. Go from here to go from here, go from here. The way that I always think about it, and I've explained this before this way, is I call it, it's really root cause analysis, but I call it the 5 whys. And Josh did not make that up. I stole it from somebody else, but the 5 whys. The 5 whys are basically just like, think about your kids. Jeff, I've had the privilege of meeting your kid, and your kid asks a lot of whys, right? And she never
only slightly disliked you, which is good.
Right.
That's better than most.
But it's why, and then why, and then why, and then why, and then why. It's trying to figure out what's really going on with something. Keep asking those probing questions. And I think all too often we tend to shut down or we tend to constrict the environment so that people don't feel that they're able to ask that next why. Okay, great. Now I know that piece. Why did that happen? Now I know that piece. Why did that happen? And keep going down to that next level. I think we have to really foster environments that allow that curiosity.
So can we get into some real world examples here? Okay. So let's look at maybe a time when an owner that you were working with looked at that data and turned it into, they were able to act on it. They asked the 5 whys. They were able to see what was going on, and they were able to make some changes. If you could use the owner's name and also tell us how big the boat is, please.
I will not use the owner's name, but I have been on the boat. Okay. Yeah. So, I'll let that guy guess who I'm talking about, but I've been on his boat. I think the real world example that comes to mind goes back to that labor thing most recently, Jeff, is we were looking at, it was interesting. I met with this owner. It's it's somebody that I started to work with a while back now. But when I first started working with them, we were looking at their bank account as the first kind of metric, and wow, that number was not impressive. Didn't really love what was going on there. And so we started to ask that next why question as to what's going on. And it became that, well, our COGS were really out of whack. Okay, great. COGS are really out of whack. Well, why? Let's go through that. And so we ended up honing in on labor. Okay, great, cool. Labor's really out of whack. And Jeff, when we started exploring labor, we really broke down labor, and I asked them to give me a breakdown week by week by week through the month of what was happening. We did that, and we found that per employee, we were literally, no joke, we were averaging around 16 hours a week of overtime. And so we started to ask the next question after that and say, okay, great. Does that mean we have a ton of work that is occurring overnight or on weekends? Because that must be the case since we have so much overtime. And when we did that next piece of analysis, we found, you know what, we have very little overnight work, and we never work on the weekends. And I was like, interesting. Okay, cool. So tell me what's happening. Are these a bunch of greedy, clock hoarding employees that are just looking out for themselves and trying to put the company under? No, that's not the case. But we also didn't give those laborers, those staff, any expectations as to when they should be back at the shop. And so the real application, after going through all that from bank account to the fact that we have an overtime issue, became, hey, you know what? We just need to put some constraints in to say, when's overtime approved, when overtime is not approved? When do I expect you to be back at the shop, Jeff? Hey, based on what I know about the job you're going to today, you should be back today at 4 o'clock. Cool. I expect to see you at 4 o'clock. If that changes, let me know. No problem. And just asking those questions or setting up that expectation within a period of a couple months, flip that around, and then you get to work that back up the other angles, right? You get to go back from that issue of overtime all the way back to now that we look at his bank account and we go, hey, look, there's money in there. That's cool. And so that's a real life example where we were able to kind of take something as simple as, crap, there's no money in the bank account to make payroll on Friday, to, hey, I think what might be causing this could be an overtime issue. So yeah, long kind of winded conversation to go back and forth through that, but the results came out right.
So if I'm a business owner and I'm hearing you say this, and I just jumped on my QuickBooks right now and I started looking at my percentage of labor costs, is there some rule of thumbs of where I need that percentage to be? And does subcontractors affect that in any way?
Absolutely. Let's go to sub second. But the first question, Jeff, I think yes, there are some baselines there. The concern I would have would be saying, hey, if I'm talking to a plumber, it's going to look like this. If I'm talking to a restoration contractor, it's going to look like this. If I'm talking to an electrician, it's going to look like this. If I'm talking to somebody who does all contents, it's going to look like this. So I think you're going to need to be a little bit more specific about, hey, ask that question. Because I could say something like this, hey, from my experience running water mitigation jobs, I'd love to see that around 20%. Okay, cool. So there's an answer around that. If I'm going to run something that's more labor intensive, like contents packing or structure cleaning, maybe that starts to trick up a little higher and go to 25%, or to 30%, or see how that plays out. So the margins can shift a little bit. So I'm cautious against saying, hey, here's where this number should be. I'd almost tie back again to saying, hey, specifically within each industry, where that should be. And I think if you explore with inside any industry, you could find some decent benchmarks for where some of those things should sit and how to look at. I also say that, the best track record, not only could you reach out to somebody like myself and get some of that information, but you could also look historically against what you've done in the past and grade you against you. And if you see that this always is sitting at 18%, and in the last quarter it suddenly jumped to 27, hey, let's ask that question there. Let's go through that.
Yeah, that seems like a red flag. So where do the subcontractors then fit into that?
So I don't necessarily build subcontractors into labor per se, so I don't look at them from that perspective. I bring subcontractors in, obviously, into COGS because they're related to what's going on with the job. But again, I'm trying to look at it from an overall perspective for me to get the job done. And again, I think this becomes very particular industry by industry. If I'm talking about something like construction, Jeff, like, I don't know, rebuilding my beautiful office here, I've got some repairs that probably need to be done on my wall. Is that I would look at it and I would say that in that world, I would love to see my subcontractors and my direct labor be around a third of what the overall revenue of that job is. So I think it goes back very specifically as well. And you're going to have to bake that in and see where it plays out. Because think about this from this perspective. If I'm a plumber who's actually running myself and two plumbers, I probably don't have a lot of subcontractors. So it's just going to be looking at my direct labor. If I'm looking at something like a construction or a reconstruction company, I potentially could have a lot of subcontracted labor. So I could have very little direct labor to my company, and then my subs come in. So I still am just going to have to look to benchmark what's going on within my industry and my business and make sure those two things are kind of riding where I want them to be.
So you've been working with companies now on this part, and then you have your own personal experience for companies that you worked for directly in the past. Is there something you can share as far as the most surprising insight that you uncovered or you saw a client uncover when it comes to the financials? Again, names and boat size included.
I thought for sure, Jeff, you were going to go to the golden toilet.
No, can I? Can I bring that up?
I don't care what you bring up because I don't
The
know.
time that the company you worked for had a golden toilet inside their office.
It was not on the P&L, Jeff. That's
It
what.
was not on the P. I'm sure it was not.
So it's not surprising at any level. Um,
Yeah.
Jeff, I don't know that there's any one, particular aha moment that I would point at and say, hey, this is really something that's kind of gone crazy for us. I think what I would point to is more of a general sense that as I'm privileged right now to walk alongside the companies that in my personal world get a chance to partner with. It really, I enjoy the aha moments when I'm allowed to sit down with an owner, walk through their P&L, and talk to them a little bit about what that number actually means.
All right, Josh. I think we're going to have to wrap the podcast up here, but I think you're going to agree that there is a lot more to the numbers, understanding the numbers, and managing the business off the numbers. So I've got a whole list of other questions that I'd like to ask you. Would you be okay if we extend and do a part two after we wrap this one up?
Absolutely, Jeff. Let's do that.
Yeah,
Let's
we
do
take
that.
a little deeper dive and give business owners a better understanding of how to manage the business, what the numbers mean, what the analytics show, and how just to be more informed and smarter as you're running the business based off the data that's out there. Is that fair to say?
That's fair. That's fair.
All
Let's
right,
do it. Nope, I'll
let's
be
do
there.
that. Okay, so to wrap up part one, if listeners could take one action today to go beyond the numbers, what would it be?
I think we'll go back to what we talked about before, Jeff, was just it's kind of cheesy, corny sounding, but just don't stop at the surface level. Just ask that one next question. And I think if we keep doing that one next question to get to the next thing, then we'll start to see the answers uncover. I think the premise of what we talked about all of part one is that we tend to take a stab at the very beginnings of our numbers, but then we just don't ask that next question. And so I think that's it. What I'd have folks take away from today would be just when you think you've gone far enough, then just take a risk and ask that next question. And if you want to talk about what some of those next questions might be, Jeff, I think that's why we have part number two. Yeah.
We got part number two coming up. Imagine the suspense.
Yeah, exactly. Cliffhanger. I'll do what I can.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching this week, and we'll have this one out soon. We'll have the part two to tag right along with it. If there are specific questions or anything that you want Josh to ask, feel free, shoot us a email, either jjones@Violand or jbachman@Violand, and say, hey, can you cover this? And we'd be happy to include that into the next group. And we appreciate your time watching. Josh, I'll leave it to you to say goodbye to our friendly viewers.
All right. Thanks for having me. We'll see you in part two.